When I stepped back into my farmhouse after 6 weeks of chemo treatments, it didn't feel like home anymore. The familiar creak of the floorboards, the smell of oak smoke clinging to the walls, all of it seemed distant, as if I were visiting a museum of my own life. My legs trembled just carrying me from the doorway to my favorite chair. I had always been strong. I had carried fence posts in both arms, plowed through summer heat until sweat stung my eyes, and chopped firewood when the winters bit deep. Now, even lifting the kettle to make tea left me winded. The doctors told me this weakness was temporary, but I could already feel the pitying looks of my family when they visited during treatments. "Dad's not the man he used to be," I overheard once, my son Daniel whispering to his wife in the hospital corridor. "He can't handle things anymore. We'll have to step in." Step in. The words echoed bitter in my mind as I sank into that chair. They weren't talking about helping. They were talking about taking. My daughter, Caroline, tried to smile when she stopped by that evening, bringing a casserole I could hardly taste. But I saw the glance she shared with her brother when they thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't concern in their eyes. It was calculation. "You should rest, Dad," Daniel said, his tone a little too firm, like he was addressing a child. "Don't worry about bills or the farm accounts. We'll take care of them for you." I forced a weak smile, though fire burned in my chest. "I can still write a check, son. Chemo doesn't wipe away 60 years of knowing numbers." He chuckled nervously, as if humoring me. "Of course, Dad. Just saying, don't wear yourself out." That night, after they left, I shuffled to the old oak desk in the corner of my study. The accounts ledger lay where I had left it, neat and precise. Every bill paid on time, every mortgage covered, every cent accounted for. My handwriting was shaky now, but the numbers were still mine. This house, this land, and those accounts, they were mine. Yet as I sat there, the weight of weakness pressing on my shoulders, I couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel and Caroline were already making plans. Plans that didn't include me. Lying in bed later, staring at the cracked ceiling where I had once painted stars for Caroline as a child, I remembered my father's words. "Eldon, never let anyone count your coins for you. If they do it once, they'll do it twice, and soon you'll have nothing left." I had survived chemo. I had survived long nights of pain that made me want to give up. But I realized then my biggest battle wasn't against illness anymore. It was against the quiet betrayal, brewing under my own roof. And though my body was weak, my resolve hardened in that moment. They thought I couldn't fight. They thought I was too fragile to notice the whispers, too tired to guard what I had built. But they had forgotten who I was. I was Eldon Carver. I had built this farm from calloused hands and stubborn will. Chemo might have weakened my muscles, but it hadn't stolen my mind. And if Daniel and Caroline thought they could step into my shoes and claim what was mine, they were about to learn the hard way this fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 3 nights after I came home, Daniel and Caroline insisted we gather for supper at Caroline's house. They said it was to welcome me back, but I felt more like a guest of honor at a funeral. The table was set too perfectly, the smiles stretched too wide, and the air was thick with something unsaid. I sat at the head, though Daniel nearly pulled the chair out for himself before Caroline shot him a look. My body still ached from the treatments, but I forced my spine straight, refusing to let them see me slouch. Weakness was fuel for whispers, and whispers were already swirling like smoke. "Dad," Caroline began sweetly, ladling soup into my bowl, "you really should rest more. Don't worry about bills or letters piling up. Daniel and I can handle all that for you." I stirred the soup slowly, letting the steam rise between us. "I've kept this house afloat for 40 years, paid every bill, balanced every ledger. I don't plan on forgetting how overnight." Daniel chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "We're not saying you've forgotten, Dad. Just things are more complicated now. Online banking, transfers, investments. It's a lot for someone recovering from chemo." Complicated. That word was a knife slipped under the table. I sipped the broth, bitter though it was. "Funny, I managed just fine before chemo. The bank never bounced a check. The mortgage never went unpaid. Daniel's jaw tightened. Caroline reached across, patting my hand gently. Too gently. We only want what's best for you. Imagine how nice it would be not to stress. Just rest, focus on your health, and let us take care of the rest. Their words wrapped in kindness, but I could hear the creak of greed underneath. They weren't offering help. They were positioning themselves. The two of them circling my accounts like buzzards, waiting for the last breath. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself, claiming fatigue. From the hallway, I paused near the kitchen door, their voices drifting clearly, now that they thought I was out of earshot. He's too stubborn, Daniel muttered. We can't wait forever. The man's practically skin and bones. Caroline hissed softly. Don't talk like that. Just keep pressing. He'll give in. And once the accounts are under our names... Her voice dropped lower, but I didn't need to hear the rest. My chest burned hotter than any chemo fire I'd endured. I walked back into the room deliberately, each step slow but steady. Their eyes widened, guilt flashing across their faces. I didn't call them out, not yet. I just adjusted my coat and said, evenly, "Thank you for supper. I'll be going now." Driving home that night, the road dark and empty, I gripped the wheel tighter than I should have with my aching hands. Betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came with polite smiles, casseroles, and whispered plans over supper. They thought I was too weak to hear, too weak to understand, too weak to fight. But in that quiet drive home, I made myself a promise. They would learn soon enough that a man doesn't survive chemo just to be killed by whispers. If they wanted my accounts, they'd find I wasn't done counting. Not yet. The morning after that supper at Caroline's, I woke earlier than usual. The treatments had left me restless at night, my body still aching from the poison meant to heal. I shuffled to my desk in the study, where the old oak drawers held every bill, receipt, and letter that kept this farm alive. I opened the ledger, as I had done for decades, just to prove to myself that my mind was still sharp enough to balance numbers. And that's when I noticed it. The latest statement from the bank, folded too neatly, with smudges that weren't mine. I knew the way my own hands left ink and pencil marks. These were different, lighter, rushed, someone else's. I unfolded the envelope, my eyes tracing the figures. Nothing missing. Not yet. But something else caught me. The bank's online portal was mentioned in bold at the bottom. A note about multiple login attempts had been flagged. My stomach tightened. I didn't use computers for banking. Never trusted them. I paid with checks and in person. So who had been trying to log in? The answer came too quickly to be coincidence. Daniel. Later that morning, I drove into town more slowly than I used to, my body reminding me of its limits. The bank sat on the corner of Main Street, brick walls that had stood longer than my children had been alive. Inside, the young teller greeted me with a smile that faltered when she saw my serious face. "Mr. Carver, good to see you. How are you feeling?" "Better than people think," I said evenly. "I'd like to check on some activity on my accounts." She hesitated. "Of course. Let me just pull that up." Her eyes flicked to the screen. "It looks like there have been several online login attempts, yes? Same last name. Carver." My jaw clenched. "But not me." She glanced up, embarrassed. "No, sir, not you." I thanked her, though fire was burning inside me. On the walk back to my truck, I felt the cold November wind cut through my coat. Betrayal wasn't just whispered plans anymore. It was actions. They were testing the doors, pushing at the locks. That evening I sat in the dim light of my study, ledger open, papers spread across the desk. I wasn't a man of grand speeches. I wasn't going to storm into Caroline's house and shout accusations. No, that was what they expected from someone weak. Instead, I sharpened the one tool Chemo hadn't touched. My patience. I pulled out a second binder, one I hadn't touched since Margaret was alive. She used to call it our safety net. It contained photocopies of deeds, insurance policies, even tucked away savings accounts that Daniel and Caroline had no idea existed. I flipped through each page, relief rising as I saw how carefully I'd kept it all. For the first time since I'd come home from chemo, I smiled. Faint, but real. They thought they were circling prey too weak to defend itself. They didn't realize they were circling a man who had already dug trenches and stored provisions long ago. That night, I heard their words again. He's too weak. He can't handle things. Soon the accounts will be ours. I whispered into the silence of my study. Not if I close the doors before you ever step inside. The game had shifted. They had made their move. Now it was my turn to bide my time, build my proof, and wait for the day when I'd walk into that bank and end their schemes with my own hands. It was a cold Friday night when the final proof came to me, not in a letter, not in numbers on a ledger, but in words whispered where they thought I couldn't hear. Daniel and Caroline had offered to check in on me. They brought dinner, takeout cartons stacked high, food I could barely taste. They fussed over me as though I were a child, Caroline adjusting the blanket on my lap, Daniel turning the thermostat up without asking. All the while, they exchanged glances over my head. After supper, I excused myself, pretending fatigue. "I'll just rest for a while," I said, dragging my voice to sound weaker than I felt. Their eyes softened, pitying. Good. Pity made people careless. I retreated to my bedroom, but left the door open just enough. From the living room, their voices drifted, hushed but clear in the old farmhouse where walls were thin. "He won't last long," Daniel muttered. "Chemo's knocked the fight out of him. We need to get those accounts sorted before anything happens." Caroline's reply was sharper, more anxious. "Don't push too fast. If he senses what we're doing, he'll dig in. He's stubborn, you know that." "Stubborn doesn't matter if the bank sees him as unfit," Daniel said, his tone hardening. "If we can prove he can't manage, we can get power of attorney. Then every cent is ours to manage. Power of attorney." The phrase hung in the air like a death sentence. I sat on the edge of my bed, fists clenched. They weren't just circling anymore. They were planning the kill. They wanted my accounts under their names, my life's work in their control, while I sat alive in this house they'd already spoken of, as though I were gone. I forced my breathing steady. Rage wouldn't help me now. Listening would. Caroline sighed. "And what if he resists? What if he surprises us?" Daniel scoffed. "Look at him. Caroline. He can barely climb the stairs. He's done. The only thing left is paperwork." I rose quietly and closed the bedroom door. My hands trembled, not from weakness this time, but from fury. They thought I was too tired, too broken, too blind, but they'd forgotten the years I'd spent running this farm, holding every receipt, signing every deal, managing every crisis. My body might have been worn, but my mind was sharp, and sharper still when betrayed. That night, I returned to my desk. I laid out 2 piles, one of the accounts they knew about and one they didn't. Margaret had always called the second pile our quiet guard. Hidden accounts, bonds, and investments she and I had tucked away over decades. Only I knew about them. I whispered her name softly as I smoothed the papers. "Maggie, you always said the day might come when trust would turn sour. You were right." From that moment, my plan began to take shape. I would not fight them with anger, nor with pleading. I would fight them with silence, with patience, with ironclad proof. And when the time came, I wouldn't argue for my place in this house or in their lives. I would simply walk into that bank, close every door they tried to pry open, and watch their schemes collapse. Chemo had taken my strength, but it had also given me time. Hours in the night where I could not sleep, where all I could do was think, and I thought of every way they might try to steal, every angle they might exploit. By the time dawn broke, I had the blueprint of my revenge written clear in my mind. They believed I was fading, but I was sharpening, and the day would come when their whispers would choke in their throats, silenced by the very man they had counted out. The following Monday, the frost was still clinging to the grass when I drove into town. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, not from weakness this time, but from the weight of what I was about to do. Chemo had drained my body, yes, but it had also stripped away every illusion I once held. Family was meant to be a shield. Instead, mine had turned into vultures. The first stop was the bank. I walked in with deliberate steps, each one slow but firm, like a soldier returning to a battlefield. The young teller greeted me nervously, but I waved her off. "I need to speak with Mr. Hendricks," I said. The branch manager, a man I'd known for years, came out of his office with surprise written all over his face. "Eldon," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "Good to see you. How are you holding up?" "I'm holding," I replied, lowering my voice, "but I need something from you, confidentially." We sat in his office, the blinds half drawn. I leaned forward. "There have been attempts on my accounts. I know who's behind them. I want to make sure, from this day forward, no one but me can touch a cent. No power of attorney, no proxy signatures, nothing." Hendricks nodded slowly. "I had a feeling you'd say that. There were multiple attempts flagged last week, same surname as yours. I'll have security tighten the accounts. We'll set up alerts so you're notified immediately if anyone tries again." Relief washed over me, one stone placed in my wall of defense. Next, I drove to Evelyn Morse's law office, the same woman who'd handled Margaret's will years ago. Her office smelled faintly of cedar and paper, a comfort in itself. She looked up from her desk, surprised. "Eldon, I thought you'd be resting after treatments." I lowered myself into the chair opposite her. "Rest is for men who can afford to trust their families. I can't." Her brows furrowed. "What's happened?" So I told her about the whispers, about Daniel and Caroline's talk of power of attorney, about the bank attempts. I kept my voice calm, steady, but the words came out like steel nails hammered into wood. She listened, nodding slowly. "You're wise to act now. We'll draft legal protections, documents that lock your accounts and property so tightly no one can claim incapacity on your part. And if they try, we'll be ready with evidence that you're of sound mind." I leaned back, the weight of chemo aches tugging at me, but my resolve sharp as ever. "That's what I need. Protection, not pity." She smiled faintly. "Eldon, pity has never suited you." By the time I returned home, the afternoon sun slanted low, painting the fields in copper light. I sat at my desk, spreading out the fresh papers Hendricks and Evelyn had given me. Tightened accounts, drafted protections. My fortress was rising, stone by stone. But I wasn't finished. That evening I pulled out Margaret's binder, the quiet guard, bonds, savings, certificates tucked away over decades. Accounts Daniel and Caroline didn't even know existed. I ran my hand over the pages and, whispering softly, "They think they're circling what matters. They don't even see the heart of it." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to smile. They wanted me weak. They wanted me confused. They wanted me silent. But what they were about to get was none of those things. What they were about to get was a father who would let them dig their own hole, step by step, until the day came when I'd close it shut with my own hands. Chemo had taken my strength, but betrayal had given me purpose, and purpose, I realized, was stronger than muscle, stronger than whispers, stronger than lies. The game had begun, and I intended to win it. A week passed after my visit to Hendricks and Evelyn. The farmhouse settled into its old rhythm, creaking floors, ticking clocks, the wind rattling against window panes. But I knew outside these walls, Daniel and Caroline were sharpening their claws. Betrayal doesn't retreat when it's denied once. It circles, waiting for another opening. That opening came sooner than I expected. I walked into the bank one Thursday afternoon to deposit a check from the grain co-op. Hendricks met me in the lobby, his face grave. "Eldon, I need to speak with you." In his office, he shut the door firmly. "Your son was here yesterday, demanded access to your accounts. He said you'd given him permission, claimed you were too unwell to handle matters yourself. When we refused, he got loud. Very loud. My jaw tightened. And Caroline? She called earlier this week, Hendricks said, flipping through his notes. Wanted to know about your medical condition? She was fishing, trying to set the stage for incompetence. We didn't give her anything, of course. The weight of chemo pressed against my bones, but anger held me upright. My own children trying to paint me as senile before I was even finished healing. Hendricks leaned forward. Eldon, I'll be frank. If they try to take this into court, it could get ugly. You need to be ready with documentation. Doctor's notes, financial records, proof of mental clarity. I nodded slowly. Already working on it. Evelyn's drafting papers. I'll get Doctor Collins to write a statement. Leaving the bank that day, I felt the eyes of half the town on me. Some sympathetic, some curious, some whispering behind hands. News traveled faster than the wind out here, and Thomas's poison wasn't the only kind that spread. Now it was Daniel and Caroline planting seeds. That evening, I returned home to find them waiting in my kitchen, uninvited. Caroline leaned against the counter, arms folded, while Daniel paced like a wolf in a cage. Dad, Daniel began, his voice firm, this is getting ridiculous. You're exhausting yourself with paperwork and bank trips. We can handle it. Just sign the papers and let us take care of things. I set my coat down, my voice level. What papers? Daniel pulled a folder from his bag, sliding it across the table. Power of attorney documents, neatly typed, signature lines waiting. My name already filled in. I stared at the papers for a long moment, then slid them back. No. Caroline's voice rose, sharp as a whip. You're being stubborn. You can barely walk to the mailbox, Dad. Why put yourself through this? Don't you trust us? I let the silence stretch before answering. Trust is earned, not demanded. And I trust the hands that built this farm more than I trust the ones trying to strip it from me. Daniel's face flushed red. You're making a mistake. We'll have to do this the hard way if you won't cooperate. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. Son, I survived chemo. I've survived droughts, fires, and debts that would have sunk stronger men. If you think I'll fold now because of whispers and papers, you don't know me at all. They left in a storm of slammed doors and muttered curses. But as I watched their car disappear down the lane, I didn't feel shaken. I felt steadier than I had in months. Because now, they'd shown their hand fully. They weren't just circling, they'd lunged, and I had every intention of letting them run headfirst into the wall I was building, brick by brick, proof by proof, until their schemes broke on it like waves against rock. Chemo had weakened my body, but betrayal was fueling my spirit, and the fire it lit inside me was only getting hotter. The week after they stormed out of my kitchen, I didn't hear from Daniel or Caroline. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. I knew that silence wasn't peace. It was plotting. They weren't giving up. They were pulling back to regroup. My suspicion proved right when Evelyn Morse, my lawyer, called one afternoon. Her voice carried that careful weight only lawyers use when delivering bad news. Eldon, she said, your children have filed a petition at the county clerk's office. They're requesting power of attorney on the grounds that you're unfit to manage your own affairs. I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly. Even though I had expected this, hearing it aloud still cut deep. My own blood dragging my name into court as though I were already gone. Let them try, I said at last, voice steady. Evelyn cleared her throat. We'll need to prepare. Doctors' evaluations, financial records, witnesses. The court won't just take their word, but we must be thorough. They'll come armed with lies. We'll counter with proof. After the call, I sat at my desk, staring at Margaret's old binder, the quiet guard. She had always worried our children would someday lose their way, blinded by greed. I used to laugh off her fears, but now I realized that she had seen clearer than I. That evening, I walked into town for supper at the diner. The usual faces were there, but conversations quieted as I entered. Whispers carried faster than wind in this town, and people already knew. I felt eyes on me, some pitying, some judging. George Harlan, my neighbor, slid into the booth across from me. He didn't sugarcoat it. "Sam, word is Daniel's saying you've lost your edge. Folks heard him in town square, calling you confused, forgetful." I stirred my coffee, letting the silence weigh heavy before answering. "Confused? Funny thing about confusion, George. It doesn't write checks on time for 40 years straight. Doesn't build a farm from nothing. Doesn't survive chemo and still stand upright." George nodded slowly. "If they drag this into court, I'll stand for you. Folks need to hear the truth from those who know." That night, I drafted my own notes. Memories sharp, dates exact, numbers precise. I wrote it all down, line after line, proof of a mind still clear, still steady. Every receipt, every tax form, every doctor's visit. But I also began something else, my strategy. I knew Daniel and Caroline thought I'd walk into court trembling, defensive, beaten before I even began. But I wouldn't walk in weak. I would walk in with every stone I'd gathered, doctors, bankers, neighbors, records, and when they threw their accusations, I'd answer with truth that hit harder than any lie. Chemo had weakened my body, yes, but betrayal had sharpened my resolve into steel. I whispered to Margaret's picture on the mantel before bed. They think they're laying a trap, but all they've done is step into mine. And as I drifted to sleep, I felt no fear, only certainty. Because when the day of reckoning came, my children wouldn't just lose the case. They'd lose the illusion that I was ever too weak to fight. The petition had been filed, the date set. 2 weeks from now, I would stand before a judge while my own children argued that I was incapable of managing my life. The weight of that knowledge sat heavy on my chest, heavier than any side effect chemo had brought. But heaviness wasn't defeat. I had work to do. My first stop was Dr. Collins' office. The old man had been my physician for more than 30 years, had seen me through broken bones, influenza, and now chemo. He looked up from his desk as I walked in, surprised but glad to see me on my own 2 feet. "Eldon," he said warmly, "you're a stubborn mule, you know that? Chemo knocks most men flat for months, and here you are, walking in like nothing happened." "Stubborn's kept me alive," I said. "Doc, I need more than medicine this time. I need your words." He listened as I explained Daniel and Caroline's petition. His eyes narrowed, anger flickering beneath his calm expression. "They're trying to strip you of your rights? Nonsense. You're clear-headed as any man your age, sharper than most, younger." He pulled out a form, scribbling quickly. "I'll prepare a full evaluation, mental clarity, decision-making, overall stability. You'll walk into that courtroom with my signature backing you up." I left his office lighter, a stone added to my wall of defense. Next was Hendricks at the bank. He welcomed me into his office, locking the door behind us. "Eldon, I've been waiting for you. Your son was here again yesterday trying to strong-arm the staff. Told them you were barely functioning. I nearly threw him out myself." I laid my hands on his desk, steady. "Will you testify, if it comes to that? Tell them the truth about my accounts, how I've never missed a payment, never lost track of a cent?" He leaned back, nodding firmly, gladly. "I'll stand in that courtroom and swear it under oath. You're one of the most disciplined clients this bank has ever had." 2 stones now. Strong. Solid. Finally, I drove out to George Harlan's place. He was splitting logs when I pulled up, the crack of his axe sharp in the crisp air. He listened as I told him what lay ahead, then wiped his brow with the back of his sleeve. "You know I've got your back, Sam," he said. "I've watched you manage that farm season after season. Folks in town might get fooled by Daniel's smooth talk, but I'll tell the judge what I've seen with my own eyes." I gripped his hand tight, gratitude swelling in my chest. That night, back at the farmhouse, I laid their names in my ledger beside my own. Collins, Hendricks, Harlan. Allies, not just acquaintances. Proof that I wasn't alone in this fight. From the kitchen, I could still hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock. the house alive around me. This was my life, my domain. Daniel and Caroline thought they could strip it away with whispers and papers, but they didn't understand the depth of the roots I'd planted. I sat at my desk, flipping through Margaret's binder, her careful handwriting still marking the edges of some pages. "You always feared this day," I murmured, "but you also gave me the tools to win it." Outside, the field stretched quiet under the moonlight. I imagined the whispers of the town drifting through the air. Maybe Eldon's slipping. Maybe his kids are right. Let them whisper. Soon the truth would roar louder than any gossip. And when I walked into that courtroom, I wouldn't walk in weak. I would walk in with my allies, with my proof, with my head held high. Because the battle wasn't about weakness anymore. It was about legacy, and legacy was mine to defend. The courthouse date circled closer on the calendar, a red mark like blood on white paper. Every day that passed seemed to thicken the air in town. At the diner, voices hushed when I walked in. Some looked away out of shame, others out of curiosity. Whispers cut sharper than knives, and Daniel had been busy sharpening them. I caught fragments here and there. Poor old Eldon doesn't know what day it is. Or his kids just want to keep him safe. Safe. That word twisted my gut. Safe was the mask they wore over greed. At church, Caroline sat in the front pew, her hand on her husband's arm, head bowed in exaggerated piety. After service, she leaned into neighbors, her tone sweet, but I saw the glances cast my way, the little shakes of heads. Too old, too frail. They weren't saying it, but they were thinking it. One evening, George Harlan came by, carrying a basket of apples from his orchard. He set it down on my counter, his jaw tight. "Sam, they're spreading lies faster than fire in August. Daniel was in town square telling anyone who'd listen that you mixed up dates on your farm contracts. Said you nearly lost the co-op deal because of it." I clenched my fists. "That deal closed clean. Papers signed and stamped." George nodded. "I know. But folks who don't check papers believe voices. Don't worry, though. When the gavel falls, I'll be standing there for you." After he left, I sat at my desk, long into the night, the hum of the lamp filling the silence. I opened Margaret's binder again, running my hands over each page. Bank records, tax filings, medical notes, all arranged in order. I added doctor. Collins's signed evaluation, Hendricks's notarized statement, George's letter of support. I built it not like paperwork, but like a weapon. Every page was a stone, and soon I'd throw them one by one until the lies shattered. The night before the hearing, Caroline called. Her voice was honeyed, practiced. "Dad, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're just trying to help. If you fight us, it'll only make you look worse." I let the silence stretch until she squirmed. Then I said quietly, "Caroline, I fought cancer with my own blood. I don't fear fighting lies with paper. I'll see you in court." The line went dead. That night, I didn't sleep much. The farmhouse creaked around me, the wind rattled the shutters, but my mind was clear, sharper than it had been in months. Chemo had stripped me down, but betrayal had rebuilt me into iron. I rose before dawn, dressed in my best suit, the same one I wore when Margaret and I signed the deed to this house decades ago. I stood before the mirror, the lines on my face deep, my hair thinner, but my eyes steady. When I stepped out onto the porch, the first light of morning painted the fields gold. The land seemed to whisper back at me, "Stand firm. You belong here." And I knew I would. Because tomorrow, when the gavel struck, it wouldn't just decide a case. It would decide whether the years I'd poured into this life meant anything, or if whispers could erase it all. I clenched Margaret's binder under my arm, my shield, my sword, and I was ready. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnished wood and dust, the kind that clung to old records and carried whispers of battles, fought long before mine. I walked through the double doors slowly, binder tucked under my arm, cane in hand, though I hardly leaned on it. People turned to look, some with pity, some with curiosity, some with that sharp gleam reserved for gossip. Daniel and Caroline were already there, seated proudly at the front beside their lawyer, a slick man in a navy suit who looked as though he practiced his smirk in the mirror. Caroline shot me a small, pained smile, the kind meant for the crowd, not for me. Daniel didn't bother. His grin was wide, confident, hungry. "Mr. and Mrs. Carver," the judge began after the clerk called the case, "you are petitioning for a power of attorney over your father, Eldon Carver, on the grounds of incapacity. You may proceed." Their lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my clients have watched their father decline since his illness. He is confused, forgetful, unable to handle complex financial matters. For his safety and the security of his estate, we request authority be transferred to his children." Daniel nodded vigorously, adding in a rehearsed voice, "Dad means well, but he doesn't understand modern banking anymore. He mixes up dates, forgets conversations. We just want to protect him." Caroline's voice trembled, as though rehearsed. "He won't even let us help with his medical bills. We're scared he'll lose everything he's worked for." The courtroom murmured. Some shook their heads sympathetically. Others glanced at me with doubt in their eyes. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Carver, how do you respond?" I rose slowly, setting the binder on the table, my hands steady. "Your Honor, I respond with proof." I opened the binder, sliding documents one after another onto the table. These are my bank records, all current. Every payment made on time. These are my tax filings, signed, dated, precise. These are insurance policies, renewed without lapse. Here is a notarized statement from Mr. Hendricks, my bank manager, confirming my clarity and accuracy. Here is Dr. Collins's medical evaluation, declaring my mind sharp. And here is a letter from my neighbor, George Harlan, attesting to my management of the farm, even through illness. The lawyer scoffed. "Papers can be forged." The judge's gaze cut to him. "Are you alleging forgery, counselor?" He swallowed, merely pointing out possibilities. "Possibilities don't outweigh sworn testimony," the judge said coldly. I met the judge's eyes. "Your Honor, chemo may have weakened my body, but it hasn't touched my mind. I've built my life on discipline, numbers, land, responsibility. My children aren't here to protect me. They're here to plunder what they think is already theirs." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Daniel's face flushed crimson. Caroline looked down, her act cracking. The judge tapped his gavel lightly. "We will hear from the witnesses." Dr. Collins testified first, clear and steady. "Mr. Carver is of sound mind. His health is improving. He is fully capable of managing his affairs." Then Hendricks. "In 30 years, I've never seen an account better maintained than Eldon Carver's. Every transaction balanced, every due met, no confusion whatsoever." Finally, George Harlan stood. "Your Honor, I've lived next to this man all my life. If he's unfit, then half of this county ought to be locked up. He's sharper than me, and I'm 10 years younger." The murmurs grew stronger now, shifting in tone. Doubt turned to respect, whispers turning against Daniel and Caroline. Their lawyer floundered. "Objection. These are biased witnesses." The judge silenced him with a glare. "Biased because they know the man? That's precisely why their testimony holds weight." I watched Daniel sink back into his chair, his jaw tight, his confidence unraveling. Caroline dabbed at her eyes, though now her tears looked less like pity and more like shame. When the judge adjourned for the day, he looked over his glasses at me. "Mr. Carver, it seems you've come prepared. We will reconvene tomorrow to finalize." I bowed my head slightly. "I'll be here." As I gathered my binder, I caught Daniel's glare. Fury, frustration, and something else. Fear. He knew the tide was turning, and for the first time since chemo began, I felt taller than him. Not in body, but in truth. The courthouse was even more crowded the next morning. Word had spread quickly. Half the town seemed to have squeezed onto the benches, eager to watch the Carver family's dirty laundry aired in full daylight. Some faces I recognized, neighbors and old friends. Others were strangers, drawn by curiosity, the same way people slow down to gawk at a wreck on the side of the road. I walked in with my binder under my arm, head high, legs aching but steady. Daniel and Caroline were already seated, their lawyer whispering furiously between them. Daniel's face was taut with anger. Caroline's eyes were red, though I doubted it was from sleepless nights. It was shame, or at least the first shadow of it. The judge entered, and the gavel fell. We resumed the matter of Eldon Carver and the petition filed by his children. Daniel's lawyer leapt to his feet, voice oiled with desperation. "Your Honor, I must reiterate, our only concern is for Mr. Carver's safety. He is advanced in age, weakened by serious illness, and—" The judge cut him off sharply. "Counselor, yesterday we heard testimony from a physician, a banker, and a neighbor, all of whom swore under oath to Mr. Carver's competence. Unless you have new evidence, I will not waste the court's time with repetition." The lawyer faltered, flipping through his notes as though the papers might rescue him. They didn't. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Carver, do you wish to make any final statement?" I rose slowly, resting one hand on the table. The room fell silent, every eye on me. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, "my children claim they want to protect me. But what they want is control. They see me as weak because of chemo, because I'm slower than I once was. But weakness of the body is not weakness of the mind. My accounts are sound, my taxes paid, my land managed. I'm not here to prove my worth as a father. I am here to prove my rights as a man who has built and safeguarded his life's work. And that proof is clear." I held up the binder, thick with pages. Every number balanced, every record kept, not one piece out of place. If that is incompetence, then I suppose this county has never seen competence at all. A ripple of agreement moved through the benches. I caught George Harlan nodding firmly, arms crossed with pride. The judge adjusted his glasses, his gaze sweeping the room. Finally, he spoke. "This court finds no evidence of incapacity. On the contrary, Mr. Carver has demonstrated sound judgment and meticulous management. The petition for a power of attorney is hereby dismissed." The gavel cracked against the block, final and firm. Gasps and murmurs filled the chamber. Some clapped softly before falling quiet. I felt a swell in my chest, not triumph exactly, but vindication. I looked at Daniel and Caroline. Daniel's face was crimson, fists clenched on his knees. Caroline looked as though she might vanish into the floorboards. Their lawyer gathered his papers quickly, avoiding my eyes. As I turned to leave, I paused beside my children. My voice was low, for their ears alone. "You wanted to take what was mine while I was still breathing. Today you learned something I should have taught you long ago. This family's strength isn't written in whispers or stolen signatures. It's written in truth, and truth doesn't bend for greed." I walked out into the autumn sunlight, the binder heavy but my shoulders light. The crowd spilled into the square, some offering handshakes, others quiet words of respect. For the first time since chemo began, I felt more than alive. I felt unbroken. The judge's words echoed in my head. Petition dismissed. But to me, it sounded like something more. Justice served. The courthouse victory was final. But I knew it wasn't the end. Greed doesn't wither after one strike of a gavel. It lingers, prowls, waits for another opening. And Daniel, he wasn't the kind to give up easily. That's why the morning after the ruling, I drove straight to the bank. The lobby was busy, farmers cashing checks, young couples filling out loan forms. But as soon as Hendricks saw me, he came forward with that firm handshake of his, guiding me into his office. "Congratulations on yesterday, Eldon. Word's all over town. Folks know the truth now." I settled into the chair, setting my binder on the desk. "Thank you, George. But I'm not here for congratulations. I'm here to finish what my children started." His brow furrowed. "Go on?" I leaned forward. "I want every account reviewed, every access point locked down. No co-signers, No digital logins except mine. If Daniel or Caroline try to touch a single penny, I want it flagged instantly. Hendricks nodded. We've already tightened security since their last stunt. But if you want to go further, I do, I interrupted firmly. I want their names removed from anything they might have wormed into. If there's a door, close it. If there's a window, board it shut. He studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. You're not just protecting your money, Eldon. You're protecting your peace. Exactly, I said. They tried to use my weakness against me. Now I'll use my strength against them, quietly, completely. For the next 2 hours, we combed through every account, checking, savings, bonds, the hidden certificates Margaret and I had tucked away long ago. Hendricks helped me restructure everything so tight it would take an act of God, or the law itself, to pry it open. When we were done, he slid the papers toward me. Sign here, here, and here. My pen scratched across the pages, each stroke firm. By the last signature, I felt lighter than I had in months. Hendricks leaned back. That's it. From this moment on, no one touches a dime without your direct say-so. If your children even breathe near your accounts, you'll know before they do. I stood, shaking his hand once more. Thank you, George. You've helped me do more than protect my money. You've helped me write the ending. As I walked out of the bank, the autumn sun glinted off the glass doors. The townsfolk milling about tipped their hats, some clapping me on the back. They had all heard the courthouse decision. Now they saw me walking tall, not the broken old man Daniel had painted. On the drive home, I thought of Margaret. I imagined her smile, that quiet nod she gave whenever I did something she approved of. You always said patience wins, I whispered into the empty truck. Well, patience and proof just carried the day. That evening, Daniel called. His voice was sharp, desperate. Dad, we just want to talk. Maybe we can still figure something out? I let the silence stretch, then answered coldly. The only thing left to figure out, son, is how you'll live knowing you tried to rob your own father and failed. I hung up before he could respond. Standing by the window, I looked out at the fields, glowing in the last light of day. The land stood steady, the same way it had through every storm, and now so did I. Because with one gavel and a few signatures, I had done more than defend my accounts. I had closed every door my children thought they could slip through, and in doing so, I had taken back my dignity, my peace, and my legacy. It didn't take long for word to spread about what I'd done at the bank. In towns like ours, secrets move slower than dust in the wind, but news of revenge traveled fast. By the weekend, folks at the diner were whispering not about my supposed weakness, but about how I had shut every door tight against my own children. That Saturday morning, the annual town market filled the square. I hadn't planned to go, but something in me wanted to stand there in the open, not hiding, not whispered about, but present, strong. I walked among the stalls, nodding to neighbors, shaking hands, hearing more than one voice say, "Good for you, Eldon. You showed 'em." Each word was a balm against the months of pity and doubt. And then I saw them, Daniel and Caroline. They stood by the cafe, their posture stiff, their faces pale. Whispers followed them like shadows. People they once charmed with sweet words now turned away. Their downfall had gone public, and they knew it. Daniel spotted me first. His jaw tightened, and he strode across the square, Caroline trailing behind him, her eyes darting nervously. The crowd parted slightly, the air charged with the weight of what was coming. "Dad!" Daniel hissed, keeping his voice low, though everyone within earshot leaned closer. "What the hell have you done? You made us look like fools. People are laughing at us." I looked at him calmly. "No, son, you made yourselves look like fools. I simply showed the truth." Caroline's voice trembled. "We were only trying to help." I cut her off sharper than I intended. Help? By dragging me into court? By whispering lies in diners and pews? By trying to paint me unfit when I was fighting for my life? Daniel's face flushed red, his fists clenching at his sides. You think you've won? You think this makes you some kind of hero? I stepped closer, my voice firm enough to carry across the square. Number. I'm not a hero. I'm a man who's lived long enough to know that blood doesn't excuse betrayal. You tried to steal from me while I was still breathing. You thought weakness gave you the right. But you forgot one thing. Weakness isn't permanent, and truth doesn't die quietly. The murmurs swelled around us. Neighbors nodded, some outright glaring at Daniel and Caroline. For once, their voices were drowned out, not mine. Caroline's lips quivered, her eyes filling with tears. Dad, please. But I shook my head slowly. You've lost my trust, and that's worth more than any account you tried to touch. Daniel looked as though he wanted to shout, but the weight of the crowd's eyes held him back. He grabbed Caroline's arm, pulling her away through the sea of whispering townsfolk. Heads turned, people muttered. Their empire of lies had crumbled not in secret, but in the bright light of the town square. I stood there for a long moment, breathing steady, the cold autumn air sharp in my lungs. Then George Harlan clapped a hand on my shoulder. You did right, Sam. They'll never live this down. I gave a small nod. It wasn't about living it down. It was about making sure they could never try again. As I walked home that evening, the sun dipped low, painting the fields in gold. The farmhouse waited, steady as ever. And for the first time since Chemo, since whispers, since betrayal, I felt something deeper than victory. I felt peace. Because the battle was over, and I hadn't just won it, I had ended it. The first frost of winter came early that year. I woke to find the fields silvered over, the world quiet under a pale morning sun. From my porch, the farmhouse looked just as it always had. Weathered wood, smoke curling from the chimney, but something in me had changed. The war was over. For months I had lived under shadows, Chemo's shadow, whispers of weakness, my children circling like wolves. But now the house felt light again, strong again, mine again. News of the courtroom decision and the showdown in the town square spread far beyond the county line. Old friends I hadn't heard from in years sent letters. Proud of you, Eldon. You stood tall. Some even stopped by, bringing pies, casseroles, small gestures that meant more than the food itself. Respect had returned to my name, carried not by pity, but by proof. Daniel and Caroline stayed away. I heard they'd left town for a while, embarrassed, their reputations soured. Neighbors who once lent them ears now crossed streets to avoid them. I didn't wish them harm, but I couldn't forget what they'd tried to do. Forgiveness was one thing, trust was another. And trust once broken doesn't grow back easy. That didn't mean my heart was empty. When Caroline's son, my grandson, came by one Sunday, his eyes wide with worry, I pulled him close. What your parents did was theirs, I told him softly. You make your own path. Don't carry their burden. He nodded, relief washing over his young face. That moment reminded me why I had fought so hard. It wasn't just about money. It was about legacy. About showing the next generation that strength isn't measured in muscles or in bank balances, but in refusing to let lies win. I spent more time on the land again, slow walks through the frosted fields, my boots crunching on the soil I had tended for decades. Each step felt like a conversation with Margaret, as though she were still beside me, nodding in that quiet way of hers. She had worried this day might come, our children losing their way. But she had also prepared me, leaving behind that binder of proof, her faith in my stubbornness. She had been right. One evening, as the sun sank red over the horizon, I sat by the fireplace, ledger open on my lap, every page neat, balanced, strong. The accounts were secure. The doors were closed. Daniel and Caroline had no keys, no access, no power over me anymore. I leaned back in my chair, the fire crackling low. They thought I was too weak, I murmured aloud, my voice steady. But weakness isn't the absence of strength. It's the test of it. Outside, the rigs in neighboring counties roared faintly, progress marching on. But here in this farmhouse, peace had settled. My fight was done. I wasn't a man who relished revenge, but I had tasted justice, and it was enough. Because when my children tried to take everything from me at my weakest, I had risen, not with fists or fury, but with patience, proof, and quiet resolve. And in the end, that had been stronger than all their schemes combined. The farmhouse creaked gently, the old oak beams settling in the cold. I closed my eyes, listening. It wasn't silence I heard, it was victory. Quiet, steady, final. And I knew at last that Margaret would have been proud. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below telling us which city you're watching from.